Welcome to Beyond the Press Release, a production of Gorcon, in which we take the time to speak with small cap executives after they put out important news. With us today, you see them back, the team from POET Technologies. POET trades on the TSX Venture Exchange on the stock symbol PTK, and in the US, for our friends there, POETF, POETF. With us, Suresh Venkatesan, who's Chairman CEO, Vivek Rajgaria, President, Thomas Mika, Chief Financial Officer. For those of you new to the story, and we always do this bit of a preamble because POET is such an incredibly exciting technology company. But on the other hand, they are difficult to understand for first-time investors. And what we're seeing is more and more people coming into the story, as you've seen more and more market activity over the last 3 months. So I'm going to give a brief description of my typical intro, but the bottom line is to understand POET, you first have to understand something first, and that's you. So every day, all of us here, we're binging on Netflix, we're watching YouTube, we're shopping on Amazon, streaming on Spotify, even doing Zoom meetings like this. And we do it all demanding the fastest speeds possible. On top of that, we want artificial intelligence while we're doing all those things to recommend our next movie, to recommend the next song, to recommend the next product, and so on and so forth. And we demand that to happen quickly, all right? Anything less than speed of light is almost unacceptable to you and I who use the internet every single day. Well, all that computing power comes from servers, data centers, and cloud computing. But what connects all of them to make it faster? That's POET Technologies. POET Technologies brings light speed to that world, to that very important component. They do it with, this is where photonics comes in. So this is where we get a little technical. Photonic devices create, detect, and manipulate light. Laser generated light is fundamental to all of this. And that requires the fastest transfer of data possible. That's what light helps do, is transfer the data as fast as possible. POET has developed a unique and disruptive differentiating new entry into the photonics market. That's called their POET Optical Interposer platform. We're going to talk about that and today's 2 press releases. Guys, welcome to the show. We got 2 big press releases to talk about, but welcome back to the show. First one, guys, before we get into the technical press release, is the fact that you've completed a $15 million financing, and you did it with Cormark, IBK Capital, PI Financial, and a syndicate led by Mark Lustig. So what does this financing say about the confidence the market has in POET? And then what does it do for the stability of the company going forward?
George, I think one of the hallmarks of this financing was that the investors in this private placement took unregistered shares. So they have a 4-month hold on these shares, and I think that demonstrates that they're long-term investors in our stock. We really appreciate Mark Lustig, who led the syndicate for this raise. He recognized a kind of asymmetric situation with respect to POET, in that we have the right management team, we've got the right technology, and he believed we needed to have the right investors in this deal to attract others to it as well. And in fact, he was right. We also had, the sponsors as agents, Cormark, back to them again for another raise. Our long-term relationship with IBK Capital and a new entrant, PI Financial. So it really puts us in a much stronger position since we reported in Q3, our Q3, we've added about 24 million Canadian to our balance sheet, which gives us a comfortable runway for what we're doing now at our current burn rate.
What kind of runway ballpark, Thomas? I know obviously it's subject to things change as time goes on, but ballpark, what kind of runway you think, what kind of comfort zone does this give the company?
We have a good 2 years at current run rates, so I think we're comfortable. But as CFO, as you know, I'm always mindful of the needs of the company and the need for capital. We're a technology company, and technology companies always need capital to grow.
And you could have more money come in over the time period as well, because you've got other options out there that are still outstanding that you would
We do.
expect probably to be.
We have a fair amount of employee options, but just in terms of warrants, we've got warrants. The 52-cent Canadian warrants are still outstanding, still a number of those outstanding. I think the number is about 18 million. And we've got warrants associated with the convertible debentures that we issued back about 2 years ago. Now, those convertible debentures all mature between April and September of this year. So given that they're strongly in the money, we expect those to convert rather than be redeemed. So that will further strengthen our balance sheet by reducing our debt load to zero. And if those warrants convert, which we expect that they will, we could add another, 11 million Canadian to the balance sheet.
All right. Bottom line is the company is in a great balance sheet position. Thomas, CFO, worries aside, because CFO always has to think about those things. You guys got to be feeling really good about the position the company's in. So with that in mind, let's move on to the business side press release that came out. And Suresh, this is where I think you'll come in really handy, because you've been great at providing investors with anecdotal layman's explanation of all the developments along the way. But the headline here, POA Technologies targets new markets for co-packaged optics and optical sensing applications with LightBar-C product. All right, that's obviously very, very technical headline, and the press release itself is even more technical. So why don't you go ahead there and give us the layman overview of why this is important?
Yeah, look, thanks. First of all, thanks for the time. Happy New Year. I don't think we've really had this, or maybe we did.
Yeah, we're on just after the New Year. But
okay,
hey, it's been a while.
Happy Chinese New Year. I mean, we haven't done it since then. But nevertheless, thanks for the time. Look, what I want to do is maybe I'm going to try to share my screen just so people have something to look at. But
let me give you screen sharing capabilities there. You've got it.
There are a lot of questions about what the heck are we talking about when we even say C-band. So I'm just gonna do a tutorial. Okay. So I think light is an electromagnetic wave. I think there's a spectrum. People talk about it, whether you're talking wireless communications, light, whatever, there's a spectrum. It's the electromagnetic spectrum. It goes from extremely, extremely short wavelengths, gamma rays on the one hand, which are rays emitted by the sun. And then you have extremely long wavelengths on the other side, which are radio waves. I mean, they have extremely long wavelengths. They travel very, very long distances, used for communications, of course, radio, and then, of course, planetary communications and so on. Somewhere in the middle, there's the visible spectrum, which is VIS. That's what you can actually visibly see. And that spectrum is comprised of multiple wavelengths itself, from about 380 nanometers to 780. On the extreme 380 side is violet, and on the 780 side is red, right? So those are the colors of the rainbow that you can visibly see, violet through red. Just south of violet is ultraviolet, so that's UV. So everything that is shorter wavelength than violet is ultraviolet. And everything that is longer wavelength than red is infrared. And so that's kind of how that spectrum is demarcated. So where we play, at least for optical communications, we play in this regime or bands called near infrared. So that is, it is just north of or just longer than the red wavelength of light. And it's called the near infrared band. And that near infrared band is made up of the 850 nanometer to 1000 nanometer band, which is serviced with gallium arsenide technology. So, obviously, when we are talking about using lasers or using semiconductors to service these frequency bands, it's also a function of what material actually emits light in that particular band. So gallium arsenide is used in the 850 to about 1,000 nanometer range. Then from about 1260 to 1650 is the world of indium phosphide, okay? And those are the lasers that we are actively working with on the optical interposer today. Now that regime is also split up further into multiple bands. There was the original band, and that's why it's called the O band. It's the original band that was originally put together, was this 1260 to 1360. And then finally it moved to the C band, then the long band. And the reason for that move was because people found out that the silicon fiber optic cables that are used to transmit light have the lowest loss at a certain wavelength, and that wavelength is in the C band and the L band compared to this original band. And so back in the 1990s, when fiber optics was a big thing and people were laying a lot of undersea communications, loss was critically important. And so most of the technology moved to the C band or L band, which is where primarily much of the optics growth happened. Then with data communications really coming online in the 2000s, and then 2010, the O band became very popular because the O band lasers tend to work well in an uncooled operation as opposed to always requiring to be cooled. And so that became very popular. But regardless, the largest, experience set, volume, etc., of lasers is still largely focused in the C band, and that's the band where much of sensing type applications typically use. So the sensing applications are either in the 850 to the 1,000 nanometer band with gallium arsenide. Those are used for retinal inspections, OTDR type applications. And then there's the sensing applications like LiDAR, gas sensing, and so on and so forth. That all happens in the C band. So C band is a very important band for a variety of different applications. It's just that data communications, which is our initial focus, or continues to be our initial focus, is all in the O band. So this is just kind of a really kind of high level background as to what these bands are and why our original focus was O band. It still is our big focus because that is where the data communications market is settled on. It's in this regime of 1260 to 1360. But there are outside of data communication applications that favor, for a variety of reasons, the C band. And so this press release is all about expanding the viability and capability of our platform. We've always talked about the importance of a platform technology, a basic platform that is compatible kind of in an end-to-end configuration across a multiple set of wavelengths. And while we inherently and intrinsically know that our material system that we use with our interposer is or should be capable, there are still development activities that need to be done to ensure that that capability and viability is in fact proven out. So I think towards the end of last year, we spent a lot of time focused on the O band, and now we are starting to expand systematically our capabilities in this new band, which is C, which allows us to now participate in applications that are outside of the data communications. Although I must insist that our primary focus still will continue to be datacom, because we've got to get products out in data communications as the first step towards building a very large business across multiple verticals. But nevertheless, this is an important press release in the sense that it is validating our capabilities as a platform at wavelengths that are outside of what is traditionally used in data communications.
What are some of the application examples in the C band?
The C band is is currently the band that is used for example, artificial intelligence photonics processors. And that's because the types of modulators that are used in those applications typically work well in the C-band. Today's LiDAR market, for example, is all focused on gallium arsenide. It's 940 nanometer wavelength. But one of the trends we see as we move towards next generation LiDAR is that people need to put out more and more power out of these light sources when you're doing these LiDAR applications. And the 940 nanometer wavelength of light is not eye safe. That is beyond a certain power level, it can burn your retina. So people try, obviously you don't want that. You don't want cars blinding people. So over time, as you increase the amount of power coming out of these LiDAR sources, there is a move towards the C-band, which is eye safe. That is, even though we can pump a lot of power out of those lasers, they are not detrimental to the human eye. And so the next generation of LiDAR solutions are moving in that direction. It's also that atmospherically, the C-band light is less susceptible to atmospheric variations, hail, snow, those kinds of things are, it's less susceptible to those. So therefore, even though the current generation of LiDAR that's in production in cars today is focused on 940 and gallium arsenide, we expect the next generation of solutions to be in the C-band and indium phosphide. And so that's another application. There are a variety of sensing applications. As you know, we used to own Dense Light, and POET at that point was heavily into sensing. So there's a bunch of sensing applications that are also very much focused in the C-band.
Yeah, just to add, Suresh, just to add to that, actually C-band first started in long-haul communications, as Suresh mentioned. The loss of light as it travels through the optical fiber is lower in that C-band. So all the what we call the telecom or longer reach networks use the C-band on the 1550 nanometer regime because you can amplify signals as it travels, and also the loss is lower. So although we've not gone into that field right now, there's this huge other communications field of C-band that we've proven out that we can do, and with the muxes and everything, that we've developed. So there's a huge adjacent market as well as very near market or relevant market to where we are today in the intra data center.
And by the way, I was going to ask, because I know it, but for people at home, Suresh or Vivek, you mentioned LiDAR a few times, and the new autonomous vehicles and things. Can you just make that connection for people who don't know that connection? What is LiDAR and the role it's going to play, for example, in next generation vehicles?
Yeah, I think, autonomous vehicles require sensors. I mean, that's basically how they can be autonomous. You need something that senses the environment and then make decisions based on what it is that you see. So autonomous cars will have a combination of multiple sensors on them. They use radar. Okay, so that's typically used. And those are 77 gigahertz and 50 gigahertz radar signals. They use visible. So there's a lot of sensing that is just visible, like mobile eye, for example. So detecting of a speed limit and so on and so forth are all visible. And LiDAR. So LiDAR is a laser driven ranging and sensing versus radar, which is a radio wave driven or microwave driven ranging and sensing. And that is typically used for a little farther out, typically harder to detect objects, blockages, and so, and then distance finding relative to vehicles in front of you and so on and so forth. So an autonomous vehicle actually requires sensors of all sorts, and LiDAR is one of those critical sensors that is important for truly autonomous, kind of what they call level 3 autonomous, vehicles.
At the same time, you don't want those lasers blinding people, right? That's
Yeah, I think, I mean, the point is, with every one of these sensors, the sensitivity is important. Sensitivity means more power, more distance. And typically that requires you to boost up power levels, but there's a limit to how much power you put out with current lasers. Also, the longer the wavelength of light, the farther the light goes, right? I mean, it's the same reason why people use radio waves, because you want it to go very long distances. So I think that's one of the reasons why people are starting to migrate in these applications to this other band. And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of the sensing applications. It's not the only one. There's a lot of biomed
yeah, of course.
sensing applications that also work in that band. And so I just use that as an example only because people are probably more familiar with those kinds of sensors than the broad, wide range of sensing applications that are out there. But for us, more importantly, we did announce that we have engaged with a customer on artificial intelligence processors, and servicing that business requires us to develop and demonstrate this capability. And so what we're doing here is tied to a customer. It's tied to products. It's not an R&D activity per se, but the capability demonstration is critically important because the underpinnings of our strategy is a platform approach that is scalable. And this goes one step further towards validating that strategy, validating that concept.
So what kind of feedback have you guys heard back from customers since you made this announcement? Or I'm assuming maybe you're speaking to customers beforehand, but extending the optical interposer new application markets must have excited your customers somewhat, and potential customers, the industry?
So yes, industry, and as Suresh articulated, there's all these applications as well as in telecom and communications also, the C-band plays a key role. However, we do need to be careful about how much we take on, right? It has to be very clearly progressed, our penetration into the market. We don't want to be doing everything for everyone, right? We can quickly become too thin in our resources. So again, as Suresh emphasized, the intra data center is really a focus where we are getting products out, the products on our roadmap. This year, there'll be several products in the O band, in the up to 10-kilometer kind of regime. And then specifically, this one customer that we've been working on is there. And then we will expand to the right, of course, within the artificial intelligence, within this optical processing space, we will expand. And then we will see where the right fit, whether it's in LiDAR or other sensing applications that we expand to. So there is excitement from customers, but at the same time, we have to be diligent about how we expand and, commit our resources.
So the good news is this opens up a whole, a much bigger target markets, but you can't chase them all at the same time.
We don't want to chase all of them, but at least it demonstrates that we are not for lack of a better word, one trick pony here, right? It's a very fundamental platform that goes back to our original value proposition. It's a hybrid integration platform, which is really fundamental to integrating all types of devices that require photonics for transmission and for processing and things like that. Yeah.
So there's always a competition question, which is, how is POET going to penetrate these new applications markets when there's competition there?
Yeah, so again, we being a very fundamental and broad platform, we have the ability to service, the spectrum that Suresh showed, that entire or almost entire light spectrum in that regime, right? So a customer, and especially large customers that have need in the O band as well as C band, right? Where they are doing optical connectivity for 210 kilometers, but also need to do co-packaged optics or artificial intelligence clusters. We can service one customer with all these different solutions. So that is highly valuable to large customers to have a technology that's going to service multiple needs of theirs, right?
Are you guys ready to go to market with this right now?
Well, we already have a customer. We had announced that earlier. So we have seeded the market or seeding the market, and then we will be diligent about which customers and markets that we expand from here. So answer to your question is yes, we are in the market, but in a very targeted customer and space.
Suresh, how do you target the markets? Do you target by where you could be strongest, or do you target by size?
Well, I think it's an intersection of technology and its capabilities, the value proposition we bring, and the applications on the other side. I mean, we don't want to target every application just because we can do it. And so in this particular case, it's a good marriage between the size of the market, which is, in this case, for example, photonics-based processors is projected to be large. It's a marriage between that, marriage between having a customer that is pulling, and the marriage between having a technology platform that has the capability, and that we've been able to fund this activity and resource it to develop the solutions. I think it's really a combination of having the customer, ensuring that the market is large enough for us to serve, and the platform has value and provides capability there. I've said this many times, we can pick up a lot of shiny rocks along the way, but that's not our intent. And I think it's really, I just keep getting back to that, because yes, these are important announcements for us, because we want to ensure that our investors, our shareholders know and understand that the platform is a scalable, fundamental platform. But at the same time, it's important that the investors and shareholders know and understand that we as a management team are focused on our near-term deliverables and data centers as the first and primary source of revenue, and that these are important to build value in the company, to build value in the platform, and will be continued down, but they're not our immediate and first source of revenue.
Yeah, just to add, what we are doing here is not completely tangential to, what we've been doing. So we have developed O-band lasers, which is in the 1310 nanometer regime. Now we have lasers, or we've co-developed lasers in the 1550 DWDM C-band regime, which is not entirely different. The wavelengths are different. And also the gratings and the multiplexer that we are doing in the O-band for our LightBar engines for 400G type is, again, the platform has a capability. There was design work, development work needed, but it's not that there was a new technology development we had to do to have these AWGs that multiplex the different DWDM, colors or wavelengths of light. So it's an adjacent or incremental development of what we've been doing. And that again emphasizes the strength of this platform.
Vivek, you're talking about CWM and DWM. Describe the difference between the two. And is the fact that Poe can embed DWDM in its waveguides give it any major competitive advantage?
Yes, it does. And just to describe the difference so everyone can appreciate it, C in CWDM is coarse wavelength division multiplexing, and in DWDM it's dense wavelength division multiplexing. Really, for people to understand, think of it as colors of light. Okay, in coarse, so I'm translating wavelength using colors, which think of it as synonymous. Okay, wavelength of light and colors of light. Okay. So in colors of light, if I use that word, in coarse wavelength division multiplexing, actually one thing I should first explain is as the temperature of the laser changes, the color of the light slightly changes of the laser light, okay? So in coarse wavelength division multiplexing, think about it as distinct colors, red, orange, blue, very distinct. So if those light moves and changes, it's still distinguishable, right? you don't confuse red from blue, even though the shade of red or shade of blue changes, right? In dense division multiplexing, the DWDM, think of it as different shades of the colors very close to each other, but becomes difficult to distinguish. However, what it enables is much more colors. So if you have a particular, you can do, light blue, navy blue, etc., and try to expand that way. So you can stack up many more colors of light into that one channel. So really what it means, of course, one thing, as Suresh explained, in the longer band in 1550, you can transmit longer distance, but also by stacking multiple colors in this narrow spectrum, you can transmit a huge amount of data. Okay, so what artificial intelligence needs and these optical processors, there's huge, massive amounts of data that has to be processed. So this C-band enables that. Okay, so of course, being in the eye safe region for things like LiDAR and all, where it's exposed to humans and concerned with eye safety, C-band provides this. So I'll come back to your question of DWDM versus CWDM. So CWDM is used more in a uncooled operation because the light, the wavelength of light can change, but it's still distinguishable. So it provides the benefit of lower power consumption in the system, but it is still limited to a certain amount of data it transmits, which is very good for the shorter reach transmissions within the data center. For DWDM systems, they have to be cooled. So the temperature of the laser is maintained so that light blue or navy blue are always consistent even when the temperature outside is changing, the ambient temperature. So that's really the difference between DWDM and CWDM.
Last question. How is it the term co-packaged optics applies to both the switches in a data center and to optical processes? Are the functions that similar?
So co-packaged optics really means where you have the optical connectivity very close to the ASIC, whether it's a switch ASIC in a data center or a processor, optical processor in a optical computing application. Because as you increase speed and in order to go longer distance, the power consumption increases tremendously. So you want to shorten that distance quite a bit and really co-package the ASIC chip with the laser or the optics. Okay, so it applies to both data center applications with the speeds going to terabits and higher. Okay, you need the co-packaged optics in the data center. And in artificial intelligence and computing, optical computing applications, you want the optics very close to the ASIC or the microprocessor chips in this case. So yes, it applies to both.
In the press release, you guys have a quote, and I want to make sure investors really understand, even people like me. The quote: "The mega trends of cloud computing, 5G, and the rapid growth of artificial intelligence are spawning numerous applications and driving increasing volume demands for both high performance lasers and integrated photonic solutions." These are mega trends. What is Poet's view on how long and how far these mega trends continue? Because to me, it seems like this is a decade at least in front of us, and which means just a massively expanding applications and markets for you.
It's just started, so it's multiple decades. We don't know how long. Of course, it will keep evolving, but the mega trends that we are playing in, cloud computing, sensing, IoT, autonomous vehicles, all this, we've just started, right? Artificial intelligence, the applications are so vast. It's at least I cannot see in our lifetimes that this mega trend would end, right? It will still keep growing.
Suresh, what does that mean? I mean, aside from the obvious that it means a much bigger and bigger market will be available to Poet and more applications. What does that mean in terms of the size of is that a double-edged sword, which means, okay, great, we're just in the beginning, like Vivek says, but at the same time, you've constantly got to keep in front of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, just because there's a very large market and we have a competitive advantage, um, you have to stay ahead. You have to keep innovating, and there are going to be competitors, and nobody's going to own 100% of the market.
No.
It just never happens. So I think, yes, the fact that it's a big market is exciting and interesting because it enables us to to have our share in it, and which is what we use for our projections for where we believe this company can be, of several years out. But I think at the same time, we need to keep innovating, keep ahead, understand the trends, understand the directions people are headed, ensure that our platform's value proposition continues to be heard and continues to be viable for all the different applications that we believe that are out there. I think there are many applications, the highest volume applications that we believe we can play in, we don't even want to consider because the amount of value or the marginal improvements that we would bring is not enough to cause people to change what they're already doing. So I think we also need to always keep in mind that we are not the incumbent, and therefore we have to keep winning business or changing people's minds on how things ought to be done versus how they're doing things, and there is a gestation period, and we need to go through that systematically. It's not one of those, oh, here's a platform, and so suddenly you sprout multiple revenue streams, right? They have to be developed. I think there's an expectation among the investor base that just because we put a press release out like this, that tomorrow we start generating revenue, and while the tomorrow is going to happen, it's not truly tomorrow. I think so. I think we want to set the expectation that we will continue to put press releases out based on real data, and based on our strategy, and based on the fact that we are expanding this platform, and that we expect this company, therefore, to have multiple verticals as an underpinning of its total revenue picture. But our focus will continue, and our near-term revenue will continue to be generated in the data communications and intra data center, as Vivek has mentioned.
As CEO, I think it's great that you are cautiously optimistic the way you sound, which is great, because a lot of CEOs can get carried away sometimes and maybe provide a false sense of or over promising and then end up under delivering. So I think that's great. But for the sake of investors at home, milestones like this press release, how much more confidence that gives you as to the positioning of Poet?
I'm not quite sure what specifically you're asking for, but I think the point is, we're not going to put a press release out if we weren't confident that we could deliver a solution that we're talking about. So yes, I think the fact that we put a press release out itself is a milestone, because there's work that has been done and data that have been taken, and a certain set of kind of maturity, if you will, that has been achieved prior to us putting out a press release. We wouldn't put out a press release on just an idea that hasn't been vetted. Okay, so from that perspective, it in itself is a milestone. Now, in terms of actually converting this into a product that's already underway, it's one of the products that we put together and taped out, and we announced that late last year. So we do expect to have this converted into a real product, taken through its qualification process and so on over the course of this year, and we do have a customer waiting and engaged with us in that. But I think the proliferation of it will happen, upon qualification. So much of that is in our plans for this year.
I'll rephrase, yeah, and thanks for answering that. And I'll maybe try and rephrase it. Hopefully I can rephrase it better, which is with this milestone, not necessarily the press release, because obviously the technological milestone came before the press release, but with this milestone, what's your level of confidence and how has it grown in terms of how POET is positioned within its market?
I mean, the confidence has always been there. I think we just have, look, just because I tell people that I'm confident, that doesn't mean anything. We gotta, back it up with real data. So I think we're just, scratching the surface, honestly.
All right, gents. Last word to you guys. That's it for my questions there. If there's something that we haven't considered yet, or if you just what your final words might be on what you want investors to take away from this milestone.
So again, I'll chime in here, but coming back to the capability of this platform, it's vast. All these mega trends that we discussed, we talked about, we can play a role in all those mega trends in our way. And being a hybrid and truly a hybrid integration photonic platform, we can enable all these applications which require photonics to be successful, those applications. So I think, again, you asked about confidence. I believe with additional milestones being validated, like having solutions in outside the work we've been doing, like O-band now expanding to C-band, just demonstrates and gives us the confidence that we can go after multiple markets. We have to be diligent. We have to be cautiously optimistic, as you mentioned, but there's a vast market for us to target systematically and diligently.
Well, clearly the market believes you, gents, because you're able to raise some substantial funds, and that comes from people who must do incredible due diligence, and it's great to see that kind of confidence. I think that that helps for people at home, investor home, who obviously this is beyond the level of expertise of many investors. So understanding what POET does, understanding this milestone, and combining that with this great raise, I think puts the picture together pretty nicely as to the level of confidence in POET. And congratulations on this milestone, and look forward to having you guys back again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
For everybody at home, you've been watching or you've been listening by podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. To the team, I won't go through all three of them again, over at POET Technologies. For those of you who are new, and we know that's a lot of you because we see from the market activity, more and more people are coming into the story. You've got to do your due diligence. One thing I would strongly recommend is go over the interviews that we've done with POET over the last 3 months. Those are incredibly valuable and really helpful in understanding what the company does. And then from Agoracom, make sure you link over to the POET Technologies website and really take a close look there. They got some great collateral information for you, and do your own deeper dive. And hopefully you discovered your next great small cap company. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. See you next time.